In the final, desperate months of World War II, as the Third Reich crumbled and Allied forces closed in, a chilling legend was born. Whispers spread of a heavily armored train, sealed with steel, burdened not with soldiers, but with treasure. Gold, jewels, priceless works of art, looted from across Europe and loaded onto carriages, bound for the mountains of Lower Silesia, in what is now Poland. And then it vanished. For decades, explorers, historians, and fortune-seekers have hunted for what became known as the Nazi gold train. Some claim to have seen it buried deep beneath the earth. Others swore it was nothing more than a myth. But what lies behind the sealed tunnels and abandoned bunkers may reveal secrets the Nazis never wanted the world to uncover. The year was 1945. Europe lay in ruins, cities reduced to rubble, and armies marched relentlessly toward the heart of Nazi Germany. In the east, the Red Army advanced like a tidal wave, pushing the Wehrmacht back mile by mile. In the west, Allied forces stormed across the Rhine. For the once mighty Third Reich, the end was no longer a question of if, but when. Amid the chaos of collapsing fronts, rumors began to spread of a final, desperate operation. In Lower Silesia, then part of Germany, now southern Poland, eyewitnesses claimed to have seen an armored train, bristling with guns and guards, rolling through the countryside under the cover of darkness. But this was no ordinary transport of troops or weapons. Local whispers spoke of something far more sinister and far more valuable. The train, people said, was loaded with treasure. Entire wagons filled with gold bars, crates of jewelry, and priceless paintings stripped from Europe's greatest museums. Some insisted it carried the lost treasures of Wrocław's banks. Others claimed the Nazis had packed the carriages with valuables seized from Jewish families, never to be returned. In a war already defined by theft and plunder, this train became the stuff of legend, a mobile vault, a steel beast carrying the Reich's last fortune. As the Soviets drew closer, the Nazis grew increasingly desperate to conceal their crimes and preserve their wealth. They had done it before, hiding looted art in salt mines, stashing stolen riches in alpine bunkers. Why not in the labyrinth of mountains and tunnels that dotted Silesia? In those last days of the Reich, it seemed entirely possible, and so the legend began to grow. Villagers near Wałbrzych recalled seeing columns of soldiers guarding railway lines, laying mines, and sealing off tunnels. Some swore that a train had been shunted into the dark mouth of a mountain passage and never emerged again. Days later, the ground was blasted, entrances collapsed, and anyone who asked questions was told to keep silent, or else. The Allies soon arrived, followed by Soviet troops who occupied the region. The area was rich with military secrets. Hidden in the Owl Mountains was Project Rees, an unfinished complex of underground tunnels and chambers. Built by forced labor under brutal conditions, its purpose remains one of the great mysteries of the war, part headquarters, part weapons factory, part shelter for Hitler himself. But what if it was also chosen as the final resting place of the gold train? After the war, stories of the vanished treasure spread like wildfire. Some dismissed them as drunken tales told in taverns. Others whispered that Soviet engineers had found the train and carried its contents eastward, burying the truth with official silence. There was no proof, only fragments of testimony, half-remembered sightings, and maps that led nowhere. Yet the legend endured. It was too powerful, too tantalizing to die. For treasure hunters, it promised unimaginable riches. For historians, it represented one more missing piece of a war littered with unanswered questions. And for the people of Poland, it was both a curse and a lure, drawing adventurers and dreamers into the forests and mountains of Lower Silesia, each hoping to unearth the truth. But legends have a way of growing darker the deeper you chase them. Every new rumor sparked another search, another dangerous excavation, another chance for disappointment or disaster. Still, one question refused to fade. If the gold train really existed, where had it gone? The answer, some claimed, was buried in the tunnels. Deep underground in chambers sealed with explosives, the train and its deadly secret might still be waiting. And soon, whispers would turn into confessions. Men who had stayed silent for decades would speak, and their words would ignite a modern-day hunt unlike anything the world had ever seen. In the decades that followed the war, the land around Wałbrzych seemed to breathe with secrets. Forests reclaimed the scars of battle, abandoned bunkers grew cold and silent, and the mouths of tunnels collapsed into the soil. Yet the whispers never ceased. Stories circulated in taverns, in miners' barracks, even in hushed conversations among railway workers. And the whispers all pointed to the same thing, a train that vanished into the earth. Some of the most haunting testimonies came not from eager treasure hunters, but from men at the edge of death. In the 1950s and 1960s, Polish families spoke of German veterans too weak to carry their memories any longer, confessing to having seen a train loaded with treasure buried under Silesian stone. One such account described soldiers working through the night, detonating charges to collapse a tunnel entrance. Another described guards who swore that anyone caught speaking of the train would be shot on sight. But the most compelling thread tying the legend together was geography. Just outside Wałbrzych lay the Owl Mountains, a jagged range riddled with caves, mine shafts, and, most importantly, the half-finished labyrinth of Project Reese. These tunnels, blasted out by forced labor from concentration camps, were vast enough to swallow entire factories. Survivors later testified to the brutality of their construction. Thousands of prisoners died from starvation, exhaustion, and beatings in the cold dark of the mountains. Project Reese was never completed, and its true purpose remains debated. Was it meant as an underground headquarters for Hitler? A weapons research facility? A command bunker for the Reich's last stand? No one can say for certain, but the scale was undeniable and the secrecy absolute. For those who believe in the gold train, it was the perfect hiding place. The Polish People's Republic, under Soviet influence, did not welcome speculation. Any rumor of hidden treasure was swiftly silenced. The Soviets, after all, had combed through the region themselves. Some historians argue that if the train ever existed, it was found in those early years and shipped eastward. But curiously, no documents confirming such a recovery have ever been released. The absence of proof only deepened the mystery. In the 1970s, locals began reporting strange discoveries near railway lines south of Wałbrzych, unusual mounds of earth, metal fragments, and collapsed shafts that seemed to lead nowhere. Amateur explorers crawled into the ruins of tunnels, guided by fading wartime maps and whispered legends. Some returned with rusted helmets or shattered tools. Others returned with nothing but stories of blocked passages and the eerie sense of being watched. One tale, retold countless times, described two young adventurers who disappeared into a sealed shaft near Sias Castle, never to emerge. Officially, there was no record of such an incident, yet locals swore that rescue workers had been deployed and silenced when they failed to find the men. Whether true or not, the story fueled a sense that the mountain itself guarded its secrets jealously. Over time, these accounts began to form a patchwork of half-truths, folklore, and tantalizing hints. A miner swore he had struck a wall of reinforced concrete where no wall should have been. A farmer recalled seeing armed patrols guarding a section of track long after the war had ended. A railway worker claimed that a section of line was deliberately rerouted in 1945, perhaps to lead directly into a concealed tunnel. Each testimony ended the same way, with silence. Witnesses would shake their heads, close their mouths, and insist they had already said too much. For many, the fear of the past had never truly faded, and yet the legend continued to grow, passing from one generation to the next. The whispers in the tunnels refused to die, as if the mountains themselves held onto a memory too heavy to release. But whispers alone were not enough. To turn rumor into truth, there needed to be proof, hard evidence that the gold train was more than a story. And in the years to come, explorers would risk everything to uncover it. What they found, or claimed to find, would ignite a frenzy the world had not seen in decades. The Cold War settled like a heavy curtain over Eastern Europe. In Poland, now firmly under Soviet control, questions about the war's last mysteries were not welcomed. Curiosity about the so-called gold train was brushed aside as bourgeois distraction, or worse, dangerous talk that could attract the unwanted attention of the secret police. Yet beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively, the story refused to vanish. The Owl Mountains, with their sprawling network of abandoned shafts and unfinished chambers, became a quiet obsession for a select few. Miners and railway workers sometimes stumbled on sealed tunnels, lined with concrete, far stronger than anything used in civilian construction. There were whispers of entire galleries discovered and then swiftly bricked up by authorities. To ordinary citizens, these were nothing more than eerie oddities. But to those who knew the legend, they were possible signs of something greater hidden underground. Unconfirmed reports suggested that Soviet engineers had, in fact, investigated the area extensively. Locals remembered columns of trucks leaving in the dead of night, carrying cargo covered with tarps. Some swore that these convoys came directly from sealed tunnel mouths near Wałbrzych. Others told of explosions deep in the mountains, detonations that collapsed entrances and left scars, still visible decades later. If the Soviets had found the train, they took whatever it carried with them, leaving behind only silence. But official Soviet archives, at least those that have been opened, make no mention of such a discovery. And herein lies the paradox. Had the Soviets unearthed a train filled with Nazi treasure, why erase all record of it? The absence of evidence became, for many, evidence of a cover-up. For others, it suggested that perhaps the gold train was still waiting untouched beneath the Silesian soil. By the 1960s and 70s, amateur treasure hunters, undeterred by state warnings, began organizing clandestine expeditions. They slipped into the Owl Mountains under the cover of night, armed with shovels, ropes, and makeshift maps. Some returned with nothing but stories of blocked tunnels and eerie drafts of cold air. Others whispered of finding rusted tracks that vanished into collapsed stone, or of walls that echoed hollowly when struck, suggesting hidden chambers on the other side. Occasionally, finds emerged that hinted at larger truths. In 1972, workers excavating near Siaz Castle uncovered crates of Nazi documents, water-damaged but still legible. They were quickly seized by the authorities, and their contents remained classified. Rumors circulated that these papers referenced secret transports through Wałbrzych in early 1945. Whether they mentioned the gold train directly, no one outside official circles ever learned. For the Polish regime, such discoveries were dangerous. They fueled popular imagination and threatened to expose what the Soviets wanted buried. Treasure hunting was officially forbidden, and those caught in the act could face severe punishment. Yet suppression only made the legend stronger. Each confiscated document, each sealed tunnel, each whispered warning seemed to confirm that something was indeed hidden. By the 1980s, Poland was changing. The grip of Soviet control was weakening, and stories long kept in the shadows began to resurface. Historians quietly collected oral testimonies from elderly villagers who remembered seeing trains moving through Wałbrzych in the war's final days. Some described wagons covered with camouflage netting. Others recalled German guards ordering locals to stay indoors at gunpoint. The memories were fragmented, but they painted a chilling picture of something unusual, something the Nazis were determined to conceal at all costs. And yet, for all the rumors, no one could break through the wall of secrecy, stone, and time. Explorers dug, authorities investigated, villagers whispered, but the train itself, if it existed, remained buried. Still, the ground beneath Wałbrzych seemed to hold its breath. With the fall of communism on the horizon, the possibility of free inquiry and open investigation was drawing near. Soon, the hunt would no longer be the pursuit of rumor, but of science, technology, and international attention. The stage was set for a discovery, or a disappointment, that would captivate the world. By the summer of 2015, the legend of the Nazi gold train had simmered for 70 years, a story whispered in Polish taverns, debated in classrooms, and pursued by amateur explorers with more courage than caution. But what had once been folklore was about to explode into international headlines. Two men stood at the center of it all: Piotr Koper, a Polish builder with a passion for history, and Andreas Richter, a German treasure hunter. They claimed they had something no one else before them possessed: hard evidence. After years of research, poring over old maps and testimonies, and scouring the landscape around Wałbrzych, they turned to technology. Using ground-penetrating radar, they surveyed a stretch of railway near the village of Żarów. What they found electrified them. The scans appeared to reveal an anomaly buried deep beneath the ground, an elongated shape, metallic in density, roughly 100 meters long. To Koper and Richter, it was unmistakable, the shape of a train. Not just any train, but the train. The discovery set off a storm. The men, careful and strategic, did not immediately reveal the exact location. Instead, they approached Polish authorities with an offer. In exchange for legal rights to a portion of whatever was uncovered, they would disclose the site. Their demand was bold: 10% of the treasure's value. It was an extraordinary gamble, yet the authorities listened. By late August, Poland's Deputy Culture Minister Piotr Żukowski made a stunning announcement. After reviewing the evidence, he declared he was 99% certain that a train had indeed been found. The words reverberated across the globe. Suddenly, the quiet town of Wałbrzych was besieged by journalists, fortune seekers, and historians. Headlines screamed of Hitler's gold train. The world held its breath. For weeks, the atmosphere in Wałbrzych was electric. Hotels filled with reporters, drone cameras buzzed over forests, and treasure hunters flocked to the region with metal detectors and shovels. Some locals saw opportunity, selling souvenirs and offering tours. Others feared the chaos, warning that the ground was unstable, riddled with mines and unexploded ordnance from the war. The Polish military cordoned off the area, citing safety concerns. Speculation ran wild. What was inside the train? Gold bars looted from Polish banks? Priceless artwork stolen from museums in Krakow, Paris, or Amsterdam? Jewelry stripped from Jewish families before their deportation? Some suggested it might contain the legendary amber room of Zarsko Selo, lost since the war. Others whispered of darker cargo, chemical weapons, secret documents, even experimental technology. But amid the feverish hope, voices of caution emerged. Historians reminded the public that no solid archival evidence supported the train's existence. Geologists questioned the interpretation of the radar images, suggesting the anomaly could be nothing more than natural rock formations or waterlogged soil. The excitement of discovery, they warned, was clouding scientific judgment. Still, the legend was too powerful to resist. Excavation teams were organized, carefully supervised by authorities. Cameras rolled as heavy machinery moved in, clawing into the earth where the radar had indicated the anomaly. The world waited, hearts pounding, as the soil was stripped away layer by layer. What they uncovered would not silence the legend, but it would ignite even deeper controversy. For when the excavations reached their target depth, there was no gleaming steel, no armored carriages, no treasure-laden wagons waiting in the dark. The ground revealed only sand, rock, and the shattered remnants of old earthworks. The supposed train was gone, or had never been there at all. The disappointment was palpable. Journalists packed their bags, officials retreated into silence, and skeptics smirked. Yet Koper and Richter refused to admit defeat. They argued that the excavation had been too shallow, that the train lay deeper still, beyond the reach of the initial dig. To them, the legend lived on, and so the mystery deepened. Was the gold train a dream built on shadows, or had it once existed, spirited away long before modern eyes could find it? The answer would depend not only on technology, but on a battle between belief and skepticism, a battle that was about to intensify. The failed excavation of 2015 left Wałbrzych in turmoil. For weeks, the world had gazed at its forests and railway embankments, expecting history to crack open and spill its secrets. Instead, the ground yielded nothing but disappointment. Yet instead of burying the legend once and for all, the anticlimax only sharpened the divide between skeptics and believers. On one side stood scientists and historians, armed with data, logic, and skepticism. On the other stood dreamers, hunters, and men like Piotr Koper, convinced that technology and persistence would one day vindicate them. Between these camps lay a question that refused to die. If the Nazi gold train never existed, why did the story endure with such ferocity? Geologists analyzed the radar scans that had fueled the frenzy. Their verdict was cautious but firm. The train-shaped anomaly was almost certainly a quirk of geology. Layers of sandstone and waterlogged soil had reflected the radar signals in misleading ways. To those trained in the science, there was no metallic behemoth lying hidden below, just the restless contours of the earth. Historians added their voices. They pointed out that no German railway records from 1945 mention a treasure convoy departing Breslau for Wałbrzych. The Nazis were meticulous record keepers, even in their collapse. If such a train had existed, surely some trace would remain. And though countless documents had been destroyed in the war's final days, the absence of even a single definitive reference gave weight to the skeptics' argument. But believers were not so easily swayed. They pointed to eyewitness testimonies, the so-called deathbed confessions, and the secrecy of Soviet operations in the region after the war. They argued that the absence of proof was not proof of absence, especially in a landscape riddled with collapsed tunnels and sealed chambers. To them, the scientists' explanations sounded too convenient, too tidy for a mystery that had endured so long. The debate reached beyond Poland. International media outlets ran features questioning the balance between myth and evidence. Was the gold train story a historical treasure hunt, or a cautionary tale about humanity's obsession with lost riches? Some compared it to the search for El Dorado, a pursuit that said more about human longing than historical fact. Yet the stakes were more than philosophical. The legend carried real-world consequences. In the wake of 2015's frenzy, treasure hunters flooded Wałbrzych, armed with shovels and makeshift scanners. Some endangered themselves by wandering into unstable shafts or digging near unexploded wartime ordnance. The Polish government was forced to issue warnings, stressing that amateur excavations risked both lives and heritage. At the same time, Jewish organizations raised moral questions. If the train ever existed, its cargo likely included valuables stripped from families murdered in the Holocaust. To treat the search as a game of treasure hunting was, to some, deeply offensive. Survivors' groups urged that any discovery should be framed not as fortune, but as restitution, an act of memory for the millions whose wealth and lives were stolen. Still, the allure was impossible to extinguish. Even after official excavations concluded with nothing found, Koper and his supporters insisted the train was there. Perhaps deeper underground, perhaps hidden in a different tunnel altogether. Rumors persisted of documents withheld by Soviet or Polish authorities, files that, if opened, might finally reveal the truth. By 2018, new scans were conducted using more advanced equipment. Once again, anomalies were detected, irregular voids beneath the earth that could in theory be tunnels. Yet once again, no definitive evidence of a train emerged. For every geologist who declared the case closed, another explorer insisted the story had not yet reached its end. The divide was more than academic. It was emotional, almost spiritual. Believers clung to hope, not only for treasure, but for vindication. The decades of whispers and rumors were rooted in something real. Skeptics, meanwhile, saw a cautionary tale about human credulity, a myth sustained by longing rather than fact. And so the legend stood at an impasse, suspended between science and faith. The train remained unseen, untouched, but never forgotten. Yet one question haunted both sides of the debate. If the gold train was not beneath Wałbrzyk's soil, then where was it? Had it ever existed at all, or had its treasure already been carried away in silence, long before modern eyes could seek it? The answer, if it exists, lies not only in the soil, but in the human need to believe in what may never be found. The story of the Nazi gold train lingers like smoke in the forests of Lower Silesia, thick, elusive, impossible to hold. Decades after the fall of the Third Reich, after the Cold War's silence, after the fever of 2015, one truth remains undeniable. The train itself has never been found, and yet its absence has not diminished its power. In some ways, it has only made it stronger, to understand why we must step back into the war itself. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the act was not only one of military aggression, but of systematic plunder. Banks were stripped of their reserves. Synagogues and churches were looted. Families, especially Jewish families marked for deportation, were robbed of everything from their homes to the rings on their fingers. This theft was not random. It was organized, catalogued, and fed into the vast machinery of the Reich. Gold was melted down, jewels sorted, art labeled and crated. What could not be sold was hidden, waiting for a future the Nazis believed they would control. But by 1945, that future was crumbling. Cities burned. The Allies advanced from the west. The Soviets thundered from the east. The Reich's treasure vaults were emptied in haste, shipments diverted, records destroyed. The Nazis knew the war was lost, but they refused to surrender their stolen wealth. For some, this wealth represented a hope of rebuilding in exile. For others, it was simply about denial, ensuring the victors could never reclaim what had been stolen. The gold train legend is rooted in that desperation. Even if the specific details remain uncertain, whether such a train left Breslau, whether it entered the tunnels near Wałbrzych, whether it was buried and sealed, what is beyond doubt is that countless treasures were hidden in those final days. We have proof from the salt mines of Austria, from the caves of Bavaria, from the scattered caches unearthed across Europe. If treasures could be hidden there, why not in Silesia's mountains? This is what makes the story so enduring. The gold train is not just a question of did it exist, but a symbol of the unresolved grief of a continent. Every unreturned painting, every missing heirloom, every vanished shipment of gold reminds us that the war's plunder has never been fully accounted for. To search for the train is to search in some small way for justice, and yet there is a darker side. The feverish hunts of 2015 revealed something unsettling about human nature. As crowds gathered with metal detectors and shovels, as journalists camped in the forests, the memory of those who had suffered often slipped into the background. Lost in the excitement was the reality that any treasure, if found, would not be a prize to claim, but evidence of crimes too vast to measure. To treat it as mere fortune hunting is to forget the victims whose possessions were stripped from them on their way to the camps. This tension between history and treasure, between memory and greed, defines the legacy of the gold train. It is a story at once alluring and unsettling. On one hand, it captivates because it suggests that somewhere beneath our feet, history waits in physical form, tangible and glittering. On the other hand, it forces us to confront why those riches were hidden in the first place and at what cost. The people of Wałbrzych live with this duality. Some see the legend as a burden, an endless parade of outsiders trampling their forests and spinning rumors. Others see it as opportunity, a way to keep their town on the map, to turn myth into tourism. For them, the gold train has already delivered, not in bullion, but in attention, in curiosity, in a place within the global imagination. But the deepest impact is on our collective memory. The gold train may never be found. Perhaps it never existed in the way the stories claim. Perhaps it lies shattered, dismantled, carted off by Soviet trucks decades ago. But as a legend, it speaks to something eternal. We want to believe that secrets remain hidden, that history still holds surprises. We want to believe that the earth itself remembers what human hands tried to erase, and maybe, in some way, that belief is more powerful than the truth. Because legends endure where facts fade. Legends inspire us to dig, to question, to argue, to remember. And in remembering, we keep the past alive, its horrors, its mysteries, its warnings. The Nazi gold train is, at its core, not about treasure. It is about memory. It is about the silence of tunnels where forced laborers died. It is about the greed that drove a regime to strip millions of their possessions and their lives. It is about the unanswered questions that linger after every war. What was lost? What remains hidden? What truths will we never uncover? As we stand in the forests of Wałbrzych today, the ground quiet and undisturbed, we may never know what lies beneath. But perhaps that is fitting. Some secrets, real or imagined, remind us less of what we might gain and more of what humanity once lost. The gold train, whether myth or reality, carries that burden. And that is why its story endures. So now I turn to you. Do you believe the train exists, waiting somewhere beneath the mountains of Poland? Or do you believe it is a ghost, a legend born of war and desperation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to keep exploring the mysteries of history, stories that haunt the earth and refuse to die, be sure to subscribe. Together, we'll keep digging into the shadows of the past.